What's up, everybody? Sean Lewis here. Got Vic in the background fielding questions,
Hello.
comments. Good morning to everyone. Today's topic is what's next? Where am I at? What do I got to do to get better? So, a little bit, it's just going to be like kind of, I think, at all stages in our development of the game, it's important to kind of take a zoom out approach and look at what kind of tools you have, look to see what kind of balance you have in your game. I think that pool is one of those games where you're going to have strengths and weaknesses, but overall, your true capacity has more to do with the amount of balance that you have in your game than it has to do with your particular strengths. Anyone that is a competitor, I think, will eventually find a way to beat a player that has big weaknesses through just putting them in situations where their opponent is weak and breaking them down through that weakness. And because most of the places that are people play pool are just, you're going to the same places, you're facing the same opponents, that anyone that you know that plays against you very often will know what your weaknesses are, and if they're really trying to win, then they will put you in those bad spots. I think that weaknesses are the thing that you should be working on. So I'll say that, just to sum up the physical part of the game, there's offensive, defensive skills. You should be working on mainly the things that you're weak with, and that's the first start. I think at the beginning of your like pool journey, you're mainly just trying to understand the physics of the game. You're trying to figure out how your body moves and how you can replicate and start with your centered alignment, looking like you're going to make the ball, making good decisions while you're standing, then be able to take that and then be able to get down on the ball consistently and repeatedly, so that every time you strike this ball, you can get really good information as far as what you did versus what you were trying to do, and use that to then modify either the way that you're standing, so that you can be like, okay, that's actually looks like I'm going to make it, but I'm actually, based off the evidence, it's probably not going to go. It's going to be full or thin. And then after a while, you develop a sense for the alignment that you need to be on, and that just continues to develop with different things. And at some point, your physical skills kind of reach a plateau where now it's more about learning how to develop your strategy, picking easier patterns through just understanding the statistics of zone play versus like staying on the correct side of the line of the shot, so that you can then go toward the right side of the ball for the next shot. Being more precise with your thought process as far as like, I want to get to this particular spot and I have these reasons, etc. And then once you kind of develop the strategy a little bit better, now you might have to come back to your physical skills to modify them so that you can then better run out. And then once you kind of have that going, then the third kind of major hurdle or obstacle that you need to really work on is to have a mental process that allows you to move forward in situations where you're, like, especially competitive environment. I think a lot of the struggles that people have are more mental and emotional that they're dealing with, and then the game becomes an observation of, okay, well, I have to observe my own mentality, my own emotionality, to understand where I'm at any particular point in the game when I'm competing, so that I can then develop more consistency and have a more well-rounded ability to execute both at the beginning of matches, middle of matches, and at the end of the match, and execute down the road. I think a lot of people start out being able to, run the first few balls pretty easily against most opponents. And then as the route continues and you get closer to the end, then the narrative can shift, and now you start thinking about what's going to happen after the match is over, after the end of the shot is over, after the end of this, little area that we're at. And then that becomes so big in their mind that they forget about the fact that it's just one shot at a time. So then you need to have some sort of method or process that helps you stay centered and focused on what's actually important, which is the moment that is now, is the thing that, when you start talking to yourself about what might happen next, or having a fear-based mentality, or you're frustrated about the results of a shot. These are all emotions that are centered around non-present moment awareness. If you're frustrated, that means that you're thinking about something that's already occurred, and that means that your awareness is on the past, and that when your awareness is in something that's already happened, it's not at this moment. And if you want to play good pool, you need to be focusing on what's happening at this moment, not at what's happening before. So you need to learn how to release the energy that you're holding that's causing you to stay in the past, and then realize at some point, through learning your own methods, there's plenty of different ways to help align and center yourself. You can do breathing, you can do like different squeezing your hand just to bring you back to this moment. There's tension exercises, there's stretching you can do, there's different mental, like counting down from 1,000, to just keep yourself really in the moment, and stop distracting yourself with all the things that had gone on in the past. And that other people, you start to get some apprehension, feelings of anxiety. You leave yourself in a tough spot, or you're facing a difficult shot, or you're playing against a great opponent, and then you see the finish line in front of you, and there's fear about what's about to happen. Either that you're not confident enough to feel like you can execute, even though the shots are doable, or whatever it is. So you got to feel like, okay, what's going to bring me back to this moment? And so you got to develop techniques to bring yourself back to the moment. Realize that it's just one shot at a time. Your opponent is not stopping you from doing anything. This is not wrestling or grappling or fighting. You get to shoot. No one is restricting your mobility, your emotions, your thought processes, or anything like that. When it's your turn, you get to do the move, and then when it's your opponent's turn, they get to do their move. That's how it works. So if you're able to separate yourself from that, which is its own thing, which is it doesn't matter who you're playing, it might matter in a sense that you're going to shoot different types of shots to change your percentages in such a way that can improve your chances to win. And against different opponents, there's going to be slightly different things that you're going to do, potentially in a small percentage of different scenarios. Most of the scenarios are pretty obvious. You either have an opportunity to run the balls out, or you have to play some sort of a defensive shot or a move or whatever to increase your chances to win at a future time. And most of the time it's clear what to do as far as being offensive, and then you have to shoot from your selection of tools there, etc. And moving beyond that, it's more, the game is simple in a sense. What's difficult is deciding what really we're going to do. And I think that part of the mental game becomes separating yourself from the results of this one particular outcome, and then kind of more, my solution for the mental game is more about taking a step back and realizing that we're just here for fun, all the things, and that, it doesn't do anybody any good to play bad. Your opponent may, get the victory because you're playing poorly, that doesn't necessarily help them get better at pool. And by challenging yourself to accept all the energy that you're feeling and just let it go and realize that, you know what, this is what I'm here for, is one different perspective you can adopt to help you play a little bit better and more consistently in pressure situations, knowing that it's actually not really pressure. We're just telling each other that it's pressure because the social contract is that at the end of the set, at the end of the match, at the end of the game, a lot of times there's a conversation that will occur, and not just between you and your opponent, but you're going to have a conversation with yourself. Your worldview will shift if you allow it to, based off the results. And I think a lot of people spend a lot of energy kind of thinking about that part of the game, about that part of the scenario, the social aspect of it, without realizing that that's actually in the way of their physical ability to execute the shots. When you're going to define what you did in the game in relation to the opponent that you're playing, then it becomes a story, and that story will mostly be decided upon based off of whatever your emotions you're feeling, will create the narrative that will then try to manifest itself. And the less you talk about what your opponent, who your opponent is, etc., the better off you're going to be. It's more about, did I perform the way that I wanted to, regardless of the scenario? I think that in an idealized fashion, it doesn't matter who your opponent is. My goal, and I think most people's goal, is to play as well as possible all the time, and that's opponent and situation agnostic, if that makes sense. It doesn't matter who you're playing, where you're playing, what the situation is, so much as what we ultimately want to do is always the same thing. We want to run the balls out, we want to execute our plan, and that the better we can do that, the better our results are going to be over time, and we need to incorporate methods to improve. So observation and awareness of what we're actually doing is more important than trying to create some sort of a narrative about, like, the situation. Like, being a good storyteller isn't going to help you be good at pool if you spend your time talking about the game so much, about in the way that the game went down, that you're actually habitualizing talking about certain key elements and embellishing upon things that aren't actually focused on improvement of your game. And thus, in a sense, you're taking your awareness away from what could be improving you, and you're telling a story instead. And that is harmful to your game, actually, because we don't have infinite time to just focus our awareness on all these different things and then come back to the things that are actually helping us once in a while. We have limited time on this planet, and if you want to really get better at pool, you have to eliminate things from your awareness that are not helping you get better, and fill those awareness times with things that are helping us get better. And a lot of that has to do with, it's like, don't talk about it, be about it, is a good thing to say, where it's like, whatever happened. What's important is, what do we gain from that experience? Either you lose to a player and you learned that I hit certain shots, incorrectly based off what I was trying to do, and I have a tendency that I'm trying to modify my behaviors to reduce that tendency and increase the tendency for more successful results. And by paying attention strictly to that process, and seeing what's happening and not worrying and thinking about my opponent, that becomes a habit that you can develop. Then it doesn't matter who you're playing. You can be playing the best players in the world, and understanding that it's really, when it's my turn to shoot, that I'm the one that's shooting the shot, and that person's not blocking the ball from going in the hole, with their will. They're actually probably rooting for you to make it. Obviously, the way the game is that if they don't make it, it is what it is. Now it's my turn to shoot the shots, and having that mentality of that, as long as I play up to my best ability and I work towards increasing that ability, then there's not anything else that can be done. And that's really as simple as it is. It doesn't matter who you're playing. It's in the long-term aspect of the game, we just want to get better at pool. It doesn't matter who you're playing against. It's actually helpful to play against better players because they're going to show you more of your weaknesses and put them on display a little bit, and it'll be more obvious what you need to do. If you're playing against a player that makes many mistakes, leaves you many opportunities, it's not going to be as apparent to you what you need to work on because you're going to be faced with more opportunities, and then if you don't take them as seriously, you may still win, and then you don't realize that, you're allowing, your lack of focus to be okay because you're not being faced with any consequences, and that I think that as people start playing better players, they realize they got to shape up a little bit. They're not going to have the amount of opportunities that they generally have against weaker opponents, and that becomes a thing where they don't feel like they deserve to win because they know that they're not putting in their best energy all the time, and that's really what you have to do. And it's a difficult adjustment to make, focusing all the time on what you're doing regardless of your opponent, but that is how you get better at pool ultimately, because there's no one forcing you to play better. There's no one forcing you to try harder. There's no one requesting, that you make these balls more often under penalty of whatever. If you're okay with losing, which you should be okay with losing, what I wouldn't be okay with so much is losing and then not trying to grow from that experience, and there's no narrative that I can construct in my mind that's really helpful for well, I constantly, I'm doing these things and losing to these good players, and I haven't figured out what to do, and I'm like, well, everybody knows what to do. That's the thing. It's like you gotta be more serious, but not in the sense that you gotta beat yourself up over having poor results. You gotta be more serious in the fact that as the experience is happening, you need to pull yourself away from the narrative that you're creating around your past history or your future fears, and move towards understanding that it's all happening at this moment, and this is the moment we need to focus on. And that the difficult part about pool and playing great is that it's easy to start talking about what's happening and not doing the thing, because once your awareness starts being about constructing a narrative, then it's not about making the ball. If we stick with our processes, then we get better. And so the mental game is a big, huge thing. And then beyond that is kind of like you gotta be confident in who you are. It's like if your mindset is that I'm gonna try to approach 700 Fargo in my lifetime and I'm a new player, then what I need to do then is to focus my energy on creating a version of myself that's capable of performing at that level, and that my constant guiding light will be then to observe myself and my behaviors that are reducing my ability to succeed, and trying to forgive myself for not being perfect at that moment, and then decide, okay, what do I really want to see? What kind of behavior do I want to exhibit in that situation where maybe I got a little bit frustrated that I missed the ball, and that frustration carried on to the next shot or the next few minutes or the rest of the day, potentially, if you can't get past it. So there's a certain amount of learning how to let go of your past history, redefining yourself as a movement towards something greater, so that then you're not faced with I always do this, I always do that, and you're more using words like, I'm working towards modifying my behaviors, I'm creating better habits for myself, I'm focusing on improving my weaknesses so that I can then continue to improve, and then that incremental progress over time over your whole career reaches, it makes you get closer to that ideal version of yourself. And then I think that one of the things that is huge, really bigger than anything else, is to understand, okay, if I don't have a target that's way out there in the future of a person that I want to be, a goal that I have, then it's very difficult to know exactly what needs to be done in this moment. My focus as a player is to just constantly try to improve. So I'm trying to refine my system and increase the ability for me to communicate it with people, because I do, coaching and these types of activities. And my goal is to just be as clear and concise and efficient with my delivery of the information. And the same with my pool game. I'm not trying to have extra things exist in my game that don't need to. Everything that's there has a purpose, and I've spent time and energy deciding, okay, this is how I want to do it, so that then when I'm in a pressure situation, I have a routine that I've decided upon that I can use as my framework for doing everything that I do in the game. And then I know that I made a conscious, clear decision that this is going to be the best thing for myself. And that I know that if I'm not doing that, that means that I'm compromised myself mentally in a way to where if I'm not following my best process, that means that I have some sort of negativity that is exhibiting itself, in my game, and that it's all I need to do then is just forgive myself for not using my best process and just go back to the process. There's nobody to beat up. There's no, no person to blame. We're working towards a higher ideal, and that by having our ideal way to play the game, the ideal process, it doesn't mean that you're going to make every shot. You're not going to get perfect on every ball. The point is more that we have this ideal so that then we can use that to guide us towards where we're going. And at no point is it important to to take a look at the negative behaviors or negative thought patterns that we have and feel bad about that. It's about forgetting about that and then replacing who you used to be with who you want to be. And as you develop as a pool player, as your Fargo increases, you will find that one of the biggest hurdles isn't so much that your game is not developing, it's that your ability to develop in a social situation has changed, where when you get better, people start looking at you differently, because most players that have been playing for 5+ years are not actually getting better. They're just kind of staying where they're at. Not to say that they can't play well when they feel like it. They just don't, for whatever reason, decide that it's worth it to put in the energy to permanently increase their skill level, to increase the bottom game above where it is now. They allow themselves to play poorly to lower their overall results down. I think that everyone's high gear is very high. It's more about how often do I play that way, and then how often do I allow myself to have bad results and not care enough to do anything about it. Because the social situation that I exist in is comfortable, and that's what's important to some people. And if it's more important to you to be socially accepted, then it's going to be more difficult for you to get better at pool, because in order to be good at pool, you have to do your thing. And it doesn't matter what your opponent wants. What you want has to be more important than that. And that becomes its own thing to deal with, which is that you're not really hurting anyone by beating them at pool, not in a physical sense. The pain and all the stuff that they are feeling as a result of losing is actually their own thing. It has nothing to do with you. When I lose at pool, mostly I know that it's my own fault, and that, once in a while, if your opponent plays exceptionally well, there's really nothing that you could have done about it, and that's outside of your control, and that's not something to feel bad about. It's just something that happens, and the better you get at pool, the more opponents you play that are high level, and the less control you have over certain aspects of the game, and the more you realize that what is in your control is what's most important to focus on, and that's what it's all about, is just realizing that it's like, it doesn't matter what my opponent thinks about me so much, after the fact. I'm trying to behave as best I can. I'm trying to win with grace and poise and be a good sportsman. And I think that if you focus on your behaviors socially as being that, then you can be as good as you want to be and not feel any sort of guilt or shame for being great at pool. It takes a little bit of time to realize that you're not really minimizing someone else's, or like throwing shade on their game by beating them. It's more about helping them get better by you yourself displaying a better version of yourself, so that everyone else can see that, yeah, you can actually get out there, you can improve at this game, and you can make it fun, you can be a good sportsman, and you can still be successful. And that you're not, by being a winner, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't make the other person a less of a person. There's ways to win and be graceful about it. You don't have to do sharking and all that other stuff to try to make your opponent play worse, even if it's a subconscious behavior, and all these little tactics that people use are social tactics that they use instead of, replacing those tactics with pool game skill. They're using other skills to try to manipulate the situation in their favor. And it's perfectly okay to do that in a way, because all it really does is, against the better players that are immune to little tricks like that, it just shows you're showing yourself as being not prepared and not strong enough to really just feel like you're good enough to compete by using all those tactics. It's just a fear-based mentality exposing itself. And any great player will then understand it as exactly what it is for what it is, and then your actual tactics are going to be thwarted and be less useful. And that's part of the thing that hurts people when they're playing against good players, is because those little tricks that they use against weaker players, mentally weaker players especially, they work against lower rated players, and they help you win, and it doesn't help against somebody that's good, because a good player has already seen all those things. They are not going to be like fazed by your talking to your whatever friend or whatever when it's your turn to play, and all the different things. So I'm not even going to talk about all the different ways that you can manipulate the game without playing it, and that as you want to get better, you just have to eliminate as much of that stuff as possible. It's not helping you, and focus more on the game, focus on what kind of player you want to be. And I think that having an observation of yourself at all phases of the game will help you get better. Some people are stuck at, oh, well, I feel like I can't, I really can play well, but I have trouble executing at the end of the rack or at the end of these sets, and I just feel like I can't overcome these great players' game. I'm like, well, you just got to keep playing against them, and you got to be aware of what you're doing, and that you think, oh, I can make all these shots and stuff. Maybe you can, but maybe you don't realize that you're not seeing exactly what's going on all the time, and that makes it to where it's harder for you to observe yourself. So constantly thinking about not just what you're doing, but how you're going about doing it, and whether asking yourself, is this actually going to work in a situation where I really want to win, and is wanting to win so important to me that it actually harms me. There's a way that I kind of like think about the game, and this is a little bit of an aside. One of the things that allows me to not worry so much about how well I'm playing, but also is one of the things that allows me to access a higher level of play, is actually not really worrying so much about about how good I'm playing. It's more about, I know that my process is such that when I'm playing poorly and I'm not executing, that it doesn't matter. What matters is that I'm learning from that process of shooting. That's in my routine has awareness and observation of what's happening so that I can use that information to make a better decision in the future. And because of that, it doesn't even matter how good I'm shooting at this moment. It doesn't matter what opponent I'm playing because I know that I'm going to playing against a top player. It's going to be different than playing against a lower rated player. However, there's own sets of, you know, hazards for each person, and that as you start to play more, you know, and get in there with better players and weaker players and playing all ranges of skill levels, you'll see that each situation is completely different in a way that allows you then to learn different things by focusing on different things and being just aware that your observational skills can be focused on different things that are happening while you're playing the game, and that allows you to have a little bit more freedom and worry less about your opponent because you know that there's always going to be growth opportunities. You know, playing against great players, people worry so much about trying to win that they don't think about how easily they could just focus on their process, and that's really the thing that's going to move them forward as much as possible. Isn't worrying about winning, it's worrying about not even worrying about it, but just being aware of, like, I know what my best process is, and that when I focus on that and I use that best process and that becomes its habit, that's the best thing I can do against every player, and that against all players, that's my focus, is learning what my best process is and honing it and developing it and making it more solid all the time, and that it doesn't matter who I'm playing against. When you're playing against a great player, your best process is going to still be the same thing as it is against a weak player. You know, yeah, you're going to get more opportunities, but you still need to play position on every ball. You still have to prioritize properly your value system. You have to solve the problems that the rack gives you. You know, when the balls are broken and then the balls are out there, there's little, you know, puzzles that need to be solved, and those puzzles don't change between one player and the next. It's just that when you're playing against a good player, you might not be as comfortable in some of these situations where you didn't worry so much about it because a weaker player wouldn't know what to do, you know, but then you're thinking too much about what your opponent's going to do, not realizing that it's like, well, it's not really about that. It's just like, if I don't know what to do in this situation, I need to develop a skill that will help me understand what to do better, and that's showing what your weaknesses are, because the points when you're playing against a great player, as soon as the balls are broken, you already know where you're going to be struggling just by looking at the way the table is laid out, and that's something that against a weaker player you might not think about because you're confident that you're going to win regardless because you know that they won't necessarily be able to get out. And against a good player, you're like, well, I don't know, maybe they will, and you got to think about all that stuff, you know, so that you can use it to help yourself get better. Because that's the thing, is that when you become the good player and then you're playing against someone weaker versus, you know, being the weaker player playing against a good player, you just got to understand that the way the roles are reversed is not so much that all of a sudden I've become like so great. It's just like, well, the skill comparison, you're as good against someone weaker than you as I am against a person that's weaker than me, and I have to adopt the same kinds of mentalities there too, where you just like, well, why don't I have confidence against good players? It's like, well, you don't have confidence is why you're only confident against people that you can see you can beat because you're using too much of your past results to dictate how good you are and not about your skill development. You know, if you don't know the outcome of the next shot, how can you say how good you are? Because your skill level it has nothing to do with how you played in the past. It's all about how you're about to play. You know, your true skill level is never going to be revealed because you have to shoot shots in order to do that. And then over time, then there's a body of work, but that's a continuing development. So if you focus too much on your past, then you're going to just put yourself in a spot where this is how good I am, and I'll never get better than that because I'm just focusing on what I've already done and not what I'm about to do. And so much of that is just, like I said, it's like being in the past, being in the future. You got to learn how to be in the now so that you can then, just be living in that spot. I know I'm kind of getting into the weeds here. Do we have anybody commenting?
No, just Mark saying good morning, and that's it. But,
What's up, Mark? Good to see you.
But got 2 people on.
Yeah. This kind of started out as just a little bit of an exercise in bringing people aware of the levels of pool and like how you're going to develop your game, and then kind of move towards more of, a little bit more of a consciousness thing where we're looking at understanding that as we develop, we need to continue to zoom out periodically to see where we're at, to see where we want to be, and continue to make adaptations and changes and modifications so that we can move towards the player that we want to be at the end of our career. And that knowing that that's all happening at this moment, as each shot that you shoot, you're developing yourself into a better player if you're shooting the shots correctly, as far as with your best process and with your availability to modify what you're doing and change it so that it works better and easier. As we get better at pool and we get older as humans, we kind of, the expectation is that you're going to be working smarter, not harder, and that even though you might be able to make the ball, if it's a lot of work to do that, then you should be looking for a simpler, easier system to make that shot so that you can spend more of your energy on other things. You got to be able to learn how to play for 2 days straight and play well. If you're using so much of your energy on every single shot that you burn yourself out in the first 2-3 hours, you're not going to be able to win tournaments, even if you play great pool at that time. If it takes you 5 hours to warm up and you don't play pool every day, you're not going to have the stamina required to be able to win a tournament versus someone that doesn't have to warm up as much because they're not trying to get in stroke. They have a process that they've memorized and that they can just fall back on that process. They're step by step in all situations, and that they have mentally are tough enough to not have to think that they need to be so prepared, because the preparation is a mental preparation. It's not a physical preparation. Your body is your body. If you're expecting it and requiring it to be fresh in order for you to play well, you're going to lose a lot of matches because you're not going to feed fresh except for the beginning. And then after that, what are you going to do? Your process has to rely only on what your capabilities are at that moment, and not relying on what your highest potential capabilities are at any time. If you're relying on yourself being your best physical version of yourself always in order to perform at the highest level, then you're only going to perform at your highest level when you're feeling great. That's not going to be enough. Your system should be bulletproof enough to where even when you're feeling a little bit trashy, maybe you're a little bit tired, you had to work a long day, or you haven't gotten enough sleep because you're traveling for the tournament, and you're sleeping in a hotel room, you didn't get to bed till midnight, the tournament starts at 9 a.m. You don't know where you're going, so there's all these extra little stresses, all that stuff. Those all take away from your capacity to play well, and then now you have reasons to complain about, I didn't get enough sleep and all these other things, and that's why I lost. And it's like, well, that's not why you lost, because if you knew all the things were going to happen, and then you say, well, okay, well, what can I do about that? And we're like, well, if you have a better process, then all those things are minimized as far as how much they affect what you're doing, and that you can overcome a lot of that. Hello.
Justin Juan posted a comment. He says, I feel like I rely on my past wins and losses a lot to determine how good I am at my current level. I want to challenge myself, but I feel like to me it means play more aggressive versus better players.
That's a good, I like that. I mean, it's, if you can only, it's like if you're putting yourself out there and playing against better players, you're going to have more opportunities to experience, better pool versus playing against whatever opponents. I'll say that, if you're trying to improve, it doesn't matter who you're playing against. You should be able to kind of understand, okay, if I can play a winning performance, if I have a process that I'm able to stick with, then that should be exactly what I need to do against every player. I think that playing aggressively versus playing safes and stuff like that has more to do with your understanding of your own percentages, and that one of the things that you want to do with pool is increase your percentages, and if you don't have a lot of time to practice, then you're going to be having to learn this on the fly, and be kind of testing your experiments in pressure situations, which I think is really the thing that is what makes you better, is that if you've been working on a certain skill, now at some point, if you want to be able to use it in competition, you actually have to use it in competition. So I think it's helpful to play, against players that maybe are, you are favored against, and experiment a little bit more, knowing that you're going to lose matches against those players, but you're also going to get more opportunities. But in order to showcase your improvement, you're going to have to use the skills that you're working on in practice. And against a better player, if you're able to pull it off and do something that you've never done, then that can be a huge boon towards your confidence, because you're showing yourself that you can do it under more pressure situations. And when you're playing against lower rated players, weaker players than yourself maybe, then you get more opportunities. You can shoot lower percentage shots and still have a high enough percentage opportunity to win, to where you can navigate the playing weaker shots and try to use those to get better, so that you can then increase your body of work of how good you play overall. My kind of the way that I play pool is that I don't really think about necessarily the percentages of shots. When my goal is to win, I will not do anything that I don't know I can do unless I have to. There's no reason to shoot a shot when you're trying to win that you're unsure of what the result's going to be. And I think that maybe at a higher level that becomes more obvious that that's what you're kind of trying to do, because my repeatability is higher than most people's that play worse than me, lower skilled than me, and that I have to rely on more of a feel that I'm capable of shooting a shot. And then at that point it's more about putting myself in a situation where I can be confident, and it doesn't matter who I'm playing against. The shot is the shot. Sometimes you start feeling a little bit weird for no reason. The other player, for whatever reason, you're allowing them to affect how you feel, and then also not playing good. So I think to kind of address that point, it's if you can not focus on the results while you're actually playing, then over the course of time, that you play, you'll see that you get better if you focus less on your opponent's play and more on your own play. And being able to execute kind of comes down to just being like, well, what did I come here for? It's like, if you know what I mean, it's like playing against better players. You're going there on purpose to do that, and you gotta be like, decide, what am I going to get out of it? You know what I mean? If you're just trying to win against people that are favored to beat you, then most of the time, because if they're favored to beat you, then statistically in your mind that you're an underdog, you should lose more often than you win. And that the only benefit then, if you're, would be then, well, what am I getting out of those losses? So then you're going to be trying to accumulate information, from all that. And that's the benefit of it, is that you're going to get better feedback against better players, because they're going to show you what your weaknesses are more obviously, because the mistakes that you make are all going to be magnified in importance, because you're going to be allowed to make less mistakes and still win, and that's the benefit, is it just makes you have to play better in order to be successful. And that in itself is like, well, how do I, you got to be like, that's how you figure out. It's like, well, you either got to try harder, or you modify your process to be a little bit easier, and then now you just focus on how good your process is. I don't know if there was really even a question that he asked about the comments, so I'm just kind of like,
He said thank you. He
Trying
said,
to
sounds like I'm on the right track.
yeah,
Track. Thanks, Sean.
exactly. So I like where you're going with that. It's one of those things where, to me, it's all, like I said, it's like against every opponent you play, it doesn't matter who it is, there's something to gain from that, and that's really all you should be working on, is trying to gain from the experience. If you are putting yourself in situations where you're going to be weakened by the experience, then you should avoid those. You don't want to be challenge yourself so much that you don't learn anything and then you get disheartened. And you don't want to create so much expectation that if you don't succeed, that you're going to be disheartened. I think that there's so many scenarios where people, like, especially these like Fargo handicap tournaments, where it's like you're playing like a 550 and under, and you're like a 545 Fargo, and you're like, oh, well, I'm near the top of the Fargo cap for this tournament, so I should be favored to win. I'm like, well, the problem is that doesn't mean anything. There's so many people that have the same mindset that are exactly the same kind of cut of cloth of that, where they're like, well, I'm near the Fargo cap for this tournament, so I should be able to win. But the problem is, if you're not looking at your history, like if you were never above that Fargo in your life, and that you've been floating at that same Fargo for the last 5 years, and you're playing a tournament where you have to be at that level, you're probably not a favorite to win, because there is probably a player that's getting better, that's Fargo was 350 2 years ago, and now they're at 550 or 545 or whatever near the cap, and their actual performance rating over the last 12 months is probably closer to 600. And if you're not focusing on how you're playing it that day, because the Fargo is a lagging indicator, meaning that it's an indication of past results only. It has nothing to do with what you're about to do. If your Fargo is 545 and you take 6 months off from playing against people in Fargo rated situations, and you focus completely on gambling at pool, and you play on more difficult equipment than the tournament's being played on, and then you focus on your game and you work on your game, and now you're practicing against 600 to 650 level Fargo players, and you're beating them. Then you go into this tournament and your Fargo is still 540, but you're not 540 anymore, because you've done the work to get better. And that anyone that's improving at pool is kind of underrated, so to speak, because their true ability, because if you look at, like, right now they're at 540 Fargo, but if you look at the fact that it's a lagging indicator, they were probably at like 540 Fargo as far as their true ability way before that, and now their actual ability is much higher than that. And then you have to forecast into the future how good your Fargo will be later in order to really understand how good you are now. Like, for instance, for myself, I was 694 Fargo in 2015, and now my Fargo is 678, but 7 months ago my Fargo was 664. So at one point I was almost 700 Fargo, and then my Fargo dropped basically 30 points over the course of a few years, and then now I'm kind of started playing again, and now my Fargo is going up. So it's like, yeah, right now my Fargo is 678. However, my past results have shown that I was close to 700 Fargo speed at one point, and my current performance over the last 6 months is over 700 Fargo. So my expectation is, based off the forecasting of like my past histories plus what my future results are looking to be, that my Fargo should then approach 700 again over the course of the next couple of years as I continue to compete. And that's really what you should be looking at, is not really what it's at right now, but you should be looking at where you're going with it and what improvements you're making to help develop your game. Like, when I work on my game, I'm focusing specifically on learning what my weaknesses are so that I can then focus on doing drills to help that, and working on my mental game, working on my perspective of being, allowing myself to win, allowing myself to lose and not beat myself up, and just enjoy myself in general as the focus of the game, and not worry so much about my Fargo, knowing that the Fargo will take care of itself and that it's going to be what it is. And it's more about improving, and by focusing on your Fargo and not focusing on what you're doing, it's just losing an opportunity to increase your skill. I don't try to spend too much time, like studying my Fargo. I do, pay attention to it a little bit because it's kind of a fun little metric. But I do know that, like I said, it's a lagging indicator, and that if I want my Fargo to go up, all I need to do is make sure I win every game. So I focus more on winning every game than I do on my Fargo, knowing that the Fargo will take care of itself over time, and that when you're losing games, if you don't know why you lost every game that you've lost, then that's something to start with and take a look at. It's like, well, why am I losing games here? Is my opponent outplaying me, or am I just making stupid errors because my thought processes, maybe I lose focus, and so then you need to just be constantly self-analyzing, like looking at what's going on, being objective, and then creating techniques and tricks and modifying your behaviors to move yourself forward. And it's not difficult things. There's infinite drills, infinite resources. It's more about like just self. When you're not going to school, they don't tell you what to do. And pool is one of those games where you have to study it and you have to practice and you have to work on it, but there's no direction that needs to be given to you. You need to be self-directed, because if you're not self-directed and you just do what other people tell you to do, if you're not into and totally buying into what they believe, then it's going to be more difficult to get better. It's more about learning for yourself. Okay, these are the things that I want to be able to do. I want to be able to be a great banker. I want to be able to be a great 9-ball player. I want to be all these things. Then it tells you what to practice. If you want to be able to shoot balls off the rail and make them because that's what your weakness is, then get out there and do that, and that will help your game. And it's as simple as that. It's just about being like, well, once you start seeing that you can improve through doing like little techniques and little tricks, then your game will get better. And then to me, that's all I ever needed. It's like, well, if I'm going to get better at this little skill, then when this skill comes up in a match, I will be able to use it, and I didn't have that capacity before, and that's what makes me better. It's just one little thing, and it's like, you can't say, oh, this skill is worth half a Fargo point. That's not really how it works. It's like, that's the thing, is like each skill doesn't help you until you use it. So it's like about understanding, okay, what skills do I need to be able to use, and then focusing on that, which is all about the weaknesses. It's like, if I'm weak in this area, that means I can't use any skills in this area, so I have to develop them. So I think that's pretty much all I have to say for this one, unless somebody else has a comment.
Justin was just commiserating, saying that actual thing happened to me on Monday, 540 and under. It was really humbling experience for sure. I learned there's a huge difference between diamond tables and 8-foot valleys with new cloth.
Oh yeah, probably went up to GTEs. But yeah, it's the equipment is amazing, where all that is, I've played a lot on different tables, different equipment, and if you don't have a familiarity with all that stuff, then that's part of the learning experience. You get dialed in on certain equipment, and then your Fargo is based off of executing in that situation, and then when you get to playing on equipment that you're unfamiliar with, you got to relearn how to play a little bit, because the equipment is playing differently and you can't rely on the same reactions. And that's when it gets to be really important that you learn how to forgive yourself, and you lessen your expectation that certain things are going to happen, and spend more of your energy observing what's going on and acquiring information that's going to help you move forward. It takes a little bit of time to be like, okay, why am I missing these shots? And it's like, it could be something as simple as like, well, the friction of the cloth is different, or the balls are dirty or whatever, and it's causing different reactions. And that if you think that you can just hit the ball the same way every time and make it go in on a diamond table versus a valley, you're wrong. It's not how it works. It's like they're not the same. There's slightly different things that are going to be having to be done, and that's part of the experience of the game, is just learning how to adapt yourself to the actual equipment that will not change at that moment. You know, because and just learn how to be successful under different situations. It's like that's why, you know, working on your weaknesses is huge, because, you know, some skills you don't really need to use on a diamond bar table versus a valley bar table. You know, then on a valley, there's much more benefit in certain types of shots and shooting certain types of ways and playing certain patterns, because the equipment is different. And that, you know, if you have a well-rounded game, then you're going to have a better capacity to be able to function properly and play at a higher level on all equipment that's thrown at you. So that's part of the fun of it, is to go to these places that you've never played on and see how your game looks, you know, under a new situation. You know, it's a good experience to get in there, and it's a little bit humbling if you haven't played on a valley in a long time and you've been playing on diamonds, and then you go to a valley and play and you're like, oh, this is way different, you know. And then I don't know how it is playing on the Predator bar tables now. That's a new thing, you know. Each table is going to play a little different, you know, so being able to adapt is always a huge thing. And that's all about like seeing at the moment that things are going on and not using a historical reference of like, oh, this is where I had to aim to make this shot. Be like, on this table at this time, I need to do this thing to make it happen. All right, everybody, that's about all the time we've got for today. As always, if you have anything that you want me to talk about or discuss, then please put comments in. You can get to our school group, get involved with that. I mean, we'd love to help that all grow and post to that. We're obviously, it's just Vic and I and a couple other people posting in there. You know, if that can grow and help other people, you know, we would love that. You know, and eventually we're going to have more content on there that's more technical stuff. I think mostly I spend time talking about the mental game, which I think is a big underexplored aspect of pool. But you know, eventually I want to have a to Z type thing going on. So that is something that I'm working on in my mind, figuring out how I'm going to go through that. But anyways, have a great one. We'll see you next time.